The Chinese embassy in Tokyo has told the Japanese government it has no right to meddle in South China Sea disputes between Beijing and Manila. Japan had earlier expressed concerns over repeated actions that obstruct freedom of navigation, including this confrontation on Monday that saw Chinese Coast Guard vessels block Philippine Navy boats as they headed to the second Thomas Shoal. Manila said the incident damaged its vessels and severely injured a sailor. It released this video showing Chinese crew brandishing axes and knives. Manila says their side were completely unarmed and fought back with their bare hands. The second Thomas Shoal lies within the Philippines' exclusive economic zone, but China also claims the reef. Manila grounded a warship there back in 1999 and insists it has only been sending humanitarian supplies to its troops stationed there. China earlier disputed the Philippine version of the incident.
非方的船只不仅夹带建筑材料，还偷运武器装备，故意冲撞中方的船只。非人员还对中方的执法人员泼水、投掷物品等。有关的做法明显加剧了海上的紧张局势，严重威胁中方人员和船只的安全。中方依法采取必要措施，维护自身主权。 合法合理，专业克制，无可非议。
The escalating skirmishes have prompted Philippine business groups to make a rare statement. They deplore the harassment of Manila's troops and call for unity towards a non-violent resolution. The group, made up of 17 business organizations, did not mention China by name. They urged the government to urgently transform the military into a modern, self-reliant force. Meanwhile, Vietnam says it's willing to talk to the Philippines on their overlapping claims over the Paracel and Spratly Islands. Last week, Manila filed a claim with the UN to an extended continental shelf in the South China Sea. Vietnam says these boundaries need to respect the rights of neighboring states. Manila has been monitoring Hanoi's island building in the South China Sea. But a Philippine Navy spokesperson says Vietnam does not initiate coercive and aggressive actions, unlike China. And for more analysis, let's hear from James Chin, Professor of Asian Studies, University of Tasmania. Well, thanks for joining us this evening, James. Firstly, we're just getting some report that high-level government officials in the Philippines, they are saying that, or suggesting rather, that resupply mission should continue at the second Thomas Shoal. So it seems like Philippines is playing hardball here. They're not backing down.
Yes, that's correct. I think it is quite clear that the Filipinos were doing something, and this is reinforced by the appearance of President Marcos at the recent Shangri-La dialogue in Singapore, where he made a very clear statement asking the Chinese to respect the Filipino claim over the islands. So I think people should not be too surprised about the confrontation that took place 48 hours ago.
Yeah, and in the meantime, well, China says that Japan has no right to meddle in China-Philippine maritime issues. But how do you think, what is China's version or perception when it comes to Vietnam offering to engage dialogue with the Philippines over Manila's UN maritime claim?
So China's position on these overlapping claims in the South China Sea has been consistent from day one, and that they want to deal with it at a bilateral level, country to country. So that's the reason why China doesn't want to talk to ASEAN about the overlapping claims. China knows very well that if they deal with it bilaterally, they are the biggest country in the region, the one with the most influence, so they have the upper hand if they deal with it bilaterally. So the Chinese position is that they don't like the fact that the Japanese and the Vietnamese are getting involved, and probably the Americans will issue a statement as well. They would rather this be dealt with bilaterally, China, Vietnam, China, the Philippines.
Right, James, we're also, getting sort of more lines coming from the Philippines that basically saying that Monday's confrontation does not invoke its defense pact with the U.S. So, in other words, what do you make of the significance, I mean, in terms of the U.S.-Philippines military alliance? What does it hold in this situation?
So the alliance pact is quite simple. It says that if any of the two countries involved, the Philippines and the US, if they face an attack by a third party, then they will mutually aid each other. I'm not surprised that the Filipinos had to issue this statement. They wanted to send a very clear signal to Beijing that the Americans will not get involved militarily. But this, of course, doesn't mean that the Americans will not get involved diplomatically. So basically, the Filipinos are trying to de-escalate from the military side, but they're going to ramp up the diplomatic pressure on China. And China will do the same as well.
And as you've mentioned, that we know also from based on the Shangri-La dialogue that the Chinese have agreed to increase military communications with the U.S. South China Sea now becoming a dangerous flashpoint. As a result of that, do you see this possibly forcing Washington and Beijing to engage in more dialogue to make sure that there isn't an outright conflict?
Well, the so-called hotline between Beijing and Washington has always been there. And the U.S. have been actively engaged with its Western allies on the South China Sea issue for many, many years. The engagement part is from the Beijing part. As I mentioned earlier, Beijing says that other countries don't have the right to get involved in South China Sea. So they only want the claimants to be involved in a dialogue. So that's the reason why they shut out all the Western countries. But all the Western countries are insisting that because South China Sea is such an important shipping lane that they want to get involved. And that is the reason why, everyone is very excited about this thing called AUKUS, this new security alliances. Everybody understands that the reason why AUKUS came into being is because the West is trying to set up a new military alliances to deal with the South China Sea issue. So everybody is very worried that South China Sea is becoming the major flashpoint after the North Korean.
Right. And also, James, in the earlier footage and video we saw, the Chinese Coast Guard, they were wielding, weapons and all of that. What do you think is behind China's decision to give its Coast Guard more powers now when tensions in the South China Sea are already running high? Is it just about flexing their military might?
It's more than that. I think I was quite surprised that they're using axes. I would have thought they'll use arms because the Chinese Coast Guard in any other country will be regarded as the normal Navy because their ships are really fighting ships. So I'm actually quite surprised that they did not use guns or other lethal weapons. They use things like axes. So I think it's very clear that the Chinese Navy is trying to flex the muscle. They're trying to force the Filipino off the ship that is sitting there, the old Filipino ship. They're trying to force the Filipino out of the area. My take is that the current crisis came about because the Filipinos tried to get the UN involved by filing a clear claim with the UN under the law of the sea to claim that area under the UN law 1982.
Right. I mean, all in, there is this sense that the relationship between the Philippines and China has been deteriorating, and that's after President Marcos Jr. Took over as president. And do you foresee this going downhill over time?
It's not only Filipinos' relationship with China. I think all the claimants, Vietnam, Malaysia, all the countries who are claiming islands in the South China Sea, they will face problems with China. And that's the reason why China wanted to deal with it bilaterally. So a lot of people are looking at this direct confrontation between the Filipinos and the Chinese to see if there's any lessons to be learned. More importantly, people are looking at how far the Chinese are willing to push the button to ensure that, they support their claims over this thing called the 9-dash line. Because the reality is that no countries in the region recognize the 9-dash line. And a couple of years ago, the Filipino government actually went to an international tribunal. And that international tribunal also found that this 9-dash line had no validity under international law.
Right. Well, thanks so very much for your input and insights, James Chin from the University of Tasmania.